Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Future Tech Podcast. It's me, Charlie Sell, the board director of Major Group, where I get a chance to speak to thought leaders, people passionate about technology and willing to give up their personal time to share their story for for the young people listening to our podcast. As always, this is supported by the STEM Ambassador Association, and it's a chance for everyone to, as I say, learn and hear about careers in STEM. I am really, really pleased to have Charlie Barker with me today. Charlie is a CTO passionate about supporting scale-up companies, working with engineering teams and helping people realize it's about building relationships as much as it is about being an excellent coder. He's currently supporting or helping Beauty Pie, the global e-commerce company, and his story is really, really interesting. So Charlie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Charlie. It's great to be here.
Let's jump straight in and tell us a bit about your career.
So, it's been a long career. I think I've spent the majority of that time working in the financial services industry in the UK, which is a regulated space, which gives its challenges. It's been a great space to work in. I highly recommend it. There's lots of interesting things you can do with technology, and building financial services companies is just one of them. But it's been very good to me, I think it's fair to say.
Fantastic. And so, how did you start? How did you get into technology?
I think like a lot of people, sort of my sort of age group, the home computers were just becoming a thing as I was a child. So sort of in my sort of 10, 11, and schools were just starting to get home computers as well. And so I think after nagging my parents, eventually they gave in and purchased the BBC Model B, which was, if I think back, was actually probably very expensive at the time. I think it was £400 back in 1980 or something like that. But I remember, getting out the box, and the great thing about computers, those home computers, is when you turned it on, immediately it had a little cursor, and you could start typing basic code, and that's what they taught us at school. So I think that was my first introduction to programming. I don't think it stuck. Like I think it kind of, I was like, oh, it's kind of that's interesting. But I'm someone who's very interested in what can you do with something, and if there's no immediate apparent use for it, I kind of file it away and wait until that maybe that use becomes in. And that really happened at the end of university. So I was just finishing up university, and I started to get back into programming. So a couple of the modules that I did at university were software development. By that point, it was things like Visual Basic, where you could actually had a visual interface that you could work with. So I found that quite interesting, and then started digging in more and more. And then my first job wasn't really, it was actually a data entry job. But after having been there for a few weeks and finished that up, they said, "Oh, we've got a position in the IT team. Do you want to join?" I was like, "Yep, sign me up." And I actually did a few months of support. And they said, "Well, we've got a permanent job as support, or we've got this junior developer role. Would you be interested in that?" And I thought to myself, well, people only phone you up when something's broken in IT support, so it might be as well to go and do the things that break, and rather than deal with the cleanup.
Oh, fantastic. And so, what made you decide, and whereabouts in your career did you decide that from being learning engineering, and you can always go into two tracks, can't you? You can go from an engineer, you can go very much into architecture and just staying very, very focused on the technology, or you can go into leadership and people management and look at supporting teams. When was there a moment in your career that you decided consciously of which way you wanted to go?
Yeah, I think most engineers are torn about this question. It really, they get pulled in both directions, because if you've been doing software development for any amount of time, writing code, and you enjoyed it, you will always, that's something, a good reason to come to work in the morning and really enjoy it. I think what happens is, and for me in my journey, I started to see that lots of decisions were being made by people who I worked for, and fair enough, that's their job, that I didn't agree with, and I felt those decisions were being made because the people who were making them didn't kind of get the engineering side of it. Little did I know that, once you actually find yourself in that position, you have to consider way more than the engineering. There's lots of other things that need to be considered, people, risks, commercial realities, all that sort of stuff. And when you end up in that managerial role, your eyes are suddenly open to this bigger picture. But I think I don't regret it. I think in my case, I haven't wanted to go back to the engineering one now that I'm kind of more on the managerial side.
Yeah, yeah, great. And we were discussing earlier about relationships and how important it is, as engineers, but it's probably transferable in all career levels and jobs. The realization that building culture, building relationships is as important as being an excellent engineer or many other skills. Talk a bit more about, your view on how important it is about relationships and culture.
I think it's brilliant to be technically, have good technical depth and good technical knowledge, and that is definitely a skill you need to acquire. I think you shouldn't be acquiring that at the expense of looking at the other parts of things that will serve you well over the long term in your career. And one of the key things is when you're working with people, is working with them in a way that is productive and collaborative and enjoyable for you and the people you're working with. And when you do that, you build those good relationships that will present you opportunities later down the line in your career. Because you're not in this day and age, we're not all going to be working in the same job, when we leave college and till we retire. We're going to be doing changing job, I don't know, every 2, 3, 4 years maybe. And so the people you work with, they'll go off and do different things, and you might decide you need a new challenge, and you'll be able to kind of phone them up, say, hey, I'm thinking about trying something new. What's going on in where you are? And that will really, they already know you. They can vouch for you. They can, they can bring you in and say, yep, no, he's good at what he does. He works well with others. All these kind of key skills that you need to develop, and that will really open doors for you over the long term. I think that's really important. So it's just kind of find a balance between acquiring the technical skills and building those good business relationships or those good personal relationships.
Yeah, yeah, and it's so it's brilliant how you articulate this because it is just so important. And when you were working, the other bit I was always interested in, or really interested with you, is we were saying earlier, you've got a real passion for supporting companies in that scale up phase, so that growth, and obviously it comes with so much ambition, but there's also a lot of challenges in scale ups, isn't there, and demands on people who join that type of business. What what have you seen? What type of people flourish in a scale up technology business?
I think the key thing is that um, when you show up to work, you don't have really an idea of how your day is going to go, and you're okay with that, or in fact, you find that energizing. You actually get a kick out of it. And obviously, the reverse of that is that you more or less know what you're going to be doing each day, and if that's your bag, then great. So I think this isn't always the case, but typically the larger, more established businesses that have been around for 10 years plus, that have grown into they've really found their place in the world, and it's more about keeping the day-to-day stuff going. Just everything has a place, put it in its place, get it. Those sorts of businesses are the complete polar opposite of startups. Startups, you tend to wear many hats, so you don't, your job role is not that well defined, and different things come along each day. And it really is the equivalent to every day you go to work, but you go to work a different way. Take a different route to work. One day you go on the bus, one day you cycle, next day you walk, and then you paraglide, and every day is different. Uh, and that's definitely what kind of drives me on, keeps me interested, keeps me engaged. When things start, and startups do kind of change as they get established, and they do the environment changes, they grow, they become a little bit less personal. Obviously, the larger the organization, the less personal it has to become. It's just a numbers game. And I tend to find that my interest starts to wane as the business kind of gets to that scale. And I'm like, okay. And that's when I tend to start thinking, okay, maybe it's time for me to look for something that's, new and not quite so well formed.
Yeah, and that's a really good point about the willingness that every day is different, and yeah, you've got to get a kick out of that because I think and it isn't for everyone, is it? Because there's also you're entering a world of a bit of uncertainty, a bit of and your willingness to roll your sleeves up and actually do jobs that may not be in the job spec, and enjoy and embrace that, which I guess is the polar opposite if you wanted to join a PLC with a very structured graduate or training scheme, and keeps you very, very focused in quite a narrow lane, but very much becoming a skill. In your view, and moving on to technology now, and this whole concept of polyglot engineering, where today people are learning a breadth of engineering and development languages versus being pure specialists. Do you have a view on where you would advise people to go, specialist or have a much wider skill set?
I think it is comes very much down to the individual and what the way they kind of think about things and the way they kind of warm to things. So there is a place for both. There are a place for people who are generalists and are really good at getting a little bit of knowledge about a very large number of languages, topics, technologies, and those people are indispensable, especially in the startup world. But then equally, there are some very specialist jobs out there where having that ability to go deep, deep down into a particular language or technology is incredibly valuable. And these are usually businesses operating in very large scale. Think the Googles and the Facebooks and so those types of roles do exist for engineers. And if that's kind of the way you're wired, then that's maybe what you should pursue. So a lot of this is about, especially when you're starting out in your career, is getting to know yourself, getting to know what it is you like, what you don't like, where you're strong, and leaning into those kind of positive sides of things, the way that things that really resonate with you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Great advice. Great advice. And then thinking about the future of technology, a lot of people are talking about AI and machine learning, and I have a passionate personal interest in quantum computing. But where where do you think the technology landscape is moving towards? Do you see anything in the future that's sort of super exciting or super scary?
Um, it's sometimes hard to predict, what's going on, and honestly, if I knew the answers, I would be the next Elon Musk. So I don't know. I think if you maybe look back at how technology has really kind of added value, it's where it takes away the sort of drudgery and where it removes the more boring parts of things that we do. And that's typically the reason why that's so valuable is it frees us up to do, the more interesting work, the things that really count. And um, computers are still not actually very good at dealing with people. They're getting better, but if you put someone who's non-technical in front of a computer, you don't get a lot. Whereas people are actually very good at dealing with people, and I think that's where it comes in. So freeing people up to do the people-to-people stuff and working on the collaborative stuff, that's really where technology leads. AI is a part of that for definite. Like it takes away some of that drudgery, and it removes some of the drudgery that when I was starting out my career, we looked at trying to solve those problems and we're like, no, it's just we'd be here forever trying to automate this thing. There's just no return on the investment. Whereas AI is actually giving us a way to automate some of the things that we weren't able to do before and take away some of that drudgery. So it's a movable feast. I think like that's the thing. That's the really interesting thing about being in this space is that every year or 2 or 3 years, something new and interesting comes along that probably won't have the impact everyone's saying it's going to have, but it will move the needle. Things will change. You will have to consider it as you roll. And things like cryptocurrency and AI and I mean, quantum computing's been around. It's kind of a bit like AI in the world. It's been around forever, but it will have its day in the sun. We just don't know when. And so I think again, going back to this generalist idea, is if you want to get into leadership and CTO, then you've got to kind of be interested in quite a broad range of topics, because those are the things that you need to kind of go and investigate. We've got this problem. Well, how could we solve it? Could we solve it with quantum? Could we solve it with AI? Do we need blockchain? What's the appropriate technology to bring to bear on this problem that we're trying to solve as a business?
Yeah, 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 yeah. Wow, and it is about solving the business problem, isn't it? And as you said, it's if any of us could predict the future of it, we would be the next Elon Musk or. So as always, time flies by, and when we've got such interesting topics. And so let's move on to career advice. So what's those one or two bits of career advice you would give the young people listening to get that foot in the door with their first or second tech job?
Yeah, I think in all honesty, if you just have a genuine passion for coding, um, then just do it. You know, like write code for fun, write and put it on GitHub as well, and write about what you're writing about. You know, create blog posts or LinkedIn posts or what is it? Just let people know that this is something you're passionate about. Um, and you'll build a bit of a digital footprint, and that'll serve you really well in your first interview because you can say, not only can you say, you know, I've maybe studied at college and I've done, you know, did this at school, but you can also show, you know, here's my passion project. I've built this for a friend or a charity or a sports club that I work with or whatever it is. Um, and you can actually sit and talk about it. You've got something to talk about with the interviewer. Whereas if all you've done is, you know, kind of roll through school, done GCSEs, A levels, and maybe been off to college, you're just going to be talking about everything that everyone else is talking about, you know, and you're not going to stand out. Um, I think one of the most wonderful stories I heard was from this was actually an internal hire out of one team into a technical job, into a technical role, and the lady in question, when she was doing her degree, she needed to gather climate data, like air, it was air quality, temperature, all that kind of stuff. So she went out and bought a load of devices and put them on top of bus stops. She did get in a bit of trouble, but once the person that had, like was questioning her as to why she was installing these devices on top of bus stops, they were like, okay, fine, right. And then they said, well, maybe you need to go and talk to these people. And in the end, she managed to install them on the tops of buildings with, you know, with permission. But it was a really, you know, she'd gone out there, she'd really used her initiative to get this data that she needed for her PhD. And the other interesting thing was these devices captured so much data. We were like, how did you deal with this data? And she's like, oh yeah, that was a bit of a problem for us. You know, we had to had to do some stuff to figure out how to deal with all the data. And these are all the sorts of problems that businesses face. So finding someone like that is you know it's going to work out well when someone's been down that little journey and used their initiative.
Yeah, yeah. Well, what a great example! Absolutely great example. Using initiative and just yeah, playing with code. If that's your career, if that's where you want to go, just
Mm.
enjoy that, and people will see it at interview, won't they? You can tell someone who's genuinely passionate about something versus someone who may be just looking at it as a paycheck or as a forced career choice.
There's one more thing I'd add as well that so when I started out, which is a long time ago, there probably was just sort of project managers and developers, and we kind of just bumbled on through and figured it out as we went. That has changed now. You know, there are so many more roles which vary in the level of technical kind of interest and you need to have, from sort of product owners who are kind of more at the sort of requirements end. You've got, you know, QAs and automation testers. You've got the boys and girls that do all the develop stuff. So there's probably 10 or 15 different roles within a large engineering team now. So it isn't just about coding. You know, you can work in this space and have a fantastic career, never having written a line of code. You just have to have sort of that interest in sort of digital product development, really.
Yeah, yeah. Well, look, Charlie, thank you so much. This has been a really interesting episode, and thank you. You know, we've covered a lot in this, so you know, hopefully for a lot of the people listening, you know, we really have come from looking at some career, but discussing everything from relationships and culture through to being able to predict emerging technologies. You know, all the way through to that career advice of being able to, yeah, love the code, and as Charlie just said, you know, being curious, I guess. So, Charlie, thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you. It's been great talking to
And
you.
fantastic. And to our listeners, that's another episode of the Future Tech podcast. It's posted on, as I said, shared with the STEM Ambassador Association. It's on the website majorgroup.com/podcast and on our Spotify channel. So thank you, everyone. And once more, thank you to Charlie.